Good evening, this is Steve Clark reporting for KLAM, and I thought I would do a little piece on money, Money 101. And the reason for this is because we would seem to be at a bit of a crossroads with all of the debt that is washing around the world these days. The last estimates that I have found are somewhere between $1 and $2 quadrillion as stranded debt in hedge funds and derivatives, and so this is absolutely crazy, and so little of us really understand debt in the big picture. And so through the researches that I've done and the reading that I've done, I've kind of condensed this down into, it's a really oversimplified picture, and it really helps to understand what is going on, but it really doesn't give you a sense of the enormity of the situation. Anyway, these are two little stories that I share with my customers to help understand what's going on and the implications of what's going on. So basically, you can look at all of the derivative hedge funds, mortgages, bank loans, investments, whatever you want to look at in forms of money, but essentially it breaks down to two forms, and that is principal and interest. Now I want you to imagine, if you can, all of the world's principal as a bathtub full of water. Okay, you got that image in your mind? Okay, so now for every cup of water we put in payment, the bank takes out a cup and a percentage. So what that leads to is a transference of the contents of the bathtub, water, which is equal to money, gets transferred into the bank vaults, and the unpayable interest gets moved from the bank vaults into the bathtub. So the debt is left in the public, and the banks end up with all the money. And I guess the way it's supposed to work is that when all the debt is in the public and foreclosures are starting to happen, then the banks of course have all the money to go and buy up all of that foreclosed property for pennies on the dollar. Whether this actually works out in the long term is questionable. We'll have to actually see whether that works out, but it's certainly worked that way in the past. There has been, when the currency system comes to an end, then there is a transference of wealth, usually from the poor to the rich. And then, the 1% of the 1%, who are the bankers basically, come up with another system, and we all get soaked again in about a 30-year run. So here we have this slow transference of water or principal into the banks and debt into the bathtub. Now the social implications of this are, it sets up a game in society of musical chairs. Okay, so where you have, say, 100 people in the room and there are 75 chairs to play with. Now that chair is not an ordinary chair, not like the play chair that you have in the game musical chairs. This chair I'm talking about is your entire life. It is the roof over your head, it is the clothes on your back, it is food on your belly, it is your hopes and dreams for the future. So as you can imagine, because there is never enough money in the system to go around adequately, when the music stops and everyone tries to grab a chair, because this is your life, there is some serious pushing and shoving going on. And of course every time the inflation music stops, a chair goes out of the room. And so there are even fewer chairs to fight over. So basically what you see is people become more and more desperate as there are fewer and fewer funds or dollars going around to cover all the needs. And of course through inflation, the value of that money is getting less and less, so you need more and more as it's transferring more and more quickly into the banks in the form of payments on loans. So this leads to an awful situation, and because money is a central part of our society. I don't think our society could really run or function very well anymore without the kind of money that we have. In other words, some accepted token that has an accepted value throughout the public that we can use as a means for exchange. You know, because obviously it's very difficult for me to say evaluate what a pound of potatoes is worth compared to a pound of steak. So when we have this intermediary medium, it really helps, you know, with transactions. And so as this game goes on, it gets more and more tense, and of course this, you know, as people get more desperate, then they do desperate things, and so the police now have to be called in, the whole justice system is called in. When you start to think about how this affects the whole of society and how it ripples through society, it's absolutely incredible. It drives absolutely everything that we have. It drives people against each other. It makes people steal to make ends meet. I mean, it's saddening to watch all of this taking place and unfolding. Now, there are three things that I look at to judge the state of the economy, and that is the M1 and M3 charts, and the third one is the Baltic Dry Index, and I will show you those right now. Okay, so this is Canada's M3 money supply, and you will see that it is at a record high. And the caption at the top reads, money supply M3 in Canada increased to 1,876,393,000,000 in October of 2014. This is an all-time high, and the record low was 37,982,000,000, and that was in January of 1970. You can see here is the US money stock measures M1, M2 and M3, and that top line that goes to the highest, that is the M3. This is a total amount of money in circulation in the system. Now of course here we have the debt running from 1940 to present day, and it tells you the presidents who were in charge of the day, and you can see the little steps up to where we have reached this hockey stick exponential growth in debt. And of course it mirrors the M3 money production curve in the previous chart, as it should, of course. And this is the Fred money velocity chart. Now the velocity of money is the speed with which money transacts through the system, and of course the lower it goes, the less economic activity is going on. So as you can see, the money supply is increasing whilst the activity from money, or created from money, is decreasing to its lowest point yet. And here is the Baltic Dry Index. And the Baltic Dry Index is very important because this is the chart of the raw materials being shipped around the world. And as you can see, actually the caption at the bottom says that it's dropped to drastic levels. It's at its lowest levels ever, and you can see from the height from which it has dropped, it's gone from 9,000 units down to less than 1,000 units. This means that there is almost little or no manufacturing, construction, building going on around the world because nothing is being shipped. So something I wanted to add to this little piece is a thing called the Minsky moment. And the Minsky moment is quite an interesting, what would you call it, interesting concept. Anyways, it was come up with by a chap called Hyman Minsky, who was a Russian economist, and basically I've drawn up a couple of charts here for you to take a look at. Okay, so you have a graph there, and you can see this is a graph of growth against time based on debt. And so the upward part of the graph there, this little piece right here, okay, this is your growth sustained by debt, and of course it takes off like a hyperbola, and at the bottom here starts your interest. Now, at the beginning of this growth pattern, the interest is very low and very easy to deal with, but as time passes, because it's exponential, it turns into a hockey stick, and where these two lines intersect is called the Minsky moment. Okay, and this is where your debt no longer fuels growth, but it actually retards growth, because the cost of debt servicing is so odorous to the country or person involved. This can happen to anybody, any situation, any business, when you fuel the growth of whatever it is that you're doing by debt. Okay, so what has happened to us here? Well, we've had the triple Minsky moment taking place. Okay, now this here, the beginning, is 1972. This is when we came off the gold standard, and we basically had no form of reckoning, and so the money creation went wild. And of course we had a Minsky moment in 1990. This was quite a deep recession we went into, to 1990 to about 1995. I guess we were pulling out. And of course I think we went to the Mexican peso crisis at this time too. And anyway, this fueled another bout of printing up until 2007, when we got into quantitative easing, and we propelled growth, although it wasn't. I mean, it looks like the growth patterns were the same, but actually as time passed, the growth has diminished, and of course the growth in the last 6 years has been pretty anemic, considering the amount of printing and the amount of money that's been put into circulation. So this is another reason why we have reached the financial crossroads, is because all of the tools in the famous toolkit have now been used, and each of these moments, each of these Minsky moments, could easily have led to a depression, but somehow through printing, hypothecation, rehypothecation, the use of a paper gold and silver market to give credence to the idea that there's a lot more gold and silver around than there actually is, they have put this off. So when this actually takes place, and I think we're beginning to see this now, and the reason I think that is because when you see the price of oil fall off as precipitously as it has done, we are looking, this is a precursor of a recession or depression, and I think there is just so much debt around. What I actually think will happen, my personal assessment of the situation, is that we will have a complete repeat of 2007 with the asset-backed commercial paper issue, when lenders just didn't trust each other. And of course, you know, because all debt is backed by debt, we're now at the point where we're sitting around a poker table where all the players now realize that nobody has anything and everyone is bluffing. You know, I don't know whether any of you have heard of a credit default swap, but a credit default swap is an amazing piece of equipment. And this is when banks ran out of lending capacity. You know, they have to have some underwriting. They can lend out under the fractional reserve system at a ratio of 10 to 1, and so they'd reached the bottom of that pit and they could no longer lend. And of course this is why, just as a sidebar here, deflation is such a great fear for central banks, is because this is a Ponzi scheme. It has to continually grow to work. You have to continually add debt to maintain growth. So anyway, a credit default swap is a situation where the banks had run out of lending capability, so they got into bed with the insurance companies, and the insurance companies based their debt as on a risk management scale. Now, insurance companies do not have the same financial requirements that banks do for lending. So they assessed the mortgages for risk, and they covered them, and the bank paid them a premium on those mortgages. And so when they had a board meeting, they got together and they said, well, if we can't lose money on these mortgages because they're covered by insurance, then they're no longer liabilities, they're assets. So what we're going to do is we're going to use them as assets, and we're going to use that to create more money against that asset. So you can see this debt piled upon debt, piled upon debt. There has to be some point where there is a reckoning, and that their reckoning must surely come sooner or late. And I think it is coming probably sooner rather than, well, I mean, it's been going on for 30 years. This is 44 years since 1972. This is huge that we pushed this along. I mean, I can't believe that it is still happening. If the supply of money is increasing and the velocity of money is decreasing, and the Baltic Dry Index is at its lowest level in, wow, how many years, 20 years or something, what does this actually mean? Well, it means that money's going somewhere, and I suspect that that money is going into the bank vaults and can't get out again to be loaned, unless it's been put into either derivatives or going into overseas markets as hot money. But I'll tell you one thing, you can sure see it's not getting out on the main street in the forms of mortgages, car loans, business improvement loans. It's all being held by the banks. And of course this is completely disingenuous, and this is why, well, we don't have any velocity, because nobody has any money to spend. Now, Canada, of all countries, and I'm going to leave the links below here, so please do check out this wonderful little series of videos called, I believe, the Crime of the Canadian Banking System. And this is a very lucid tale. It's not a ranting and raving YouTube video. It's very well put together and very well researched. And basically what it is going to show you, it's going to tell the story of the Canadian money system from way back to 1918 to present day, and how the Bank of Canada was formed. But quite simply, after the Depression, we had a wonderful Prime Minister called R.B. Bennett, and Canada, of course, like all countries, was in a lot of trouble, and he asked the Queen to appoint a commissioner to investigate the banking system and to see whether we could create our own Bank of Canada here in Canada. The Queen agreed, and she appointed a chap called Gerald Grattan McGeer. He was the Mayor of Vancouver and a lawyer, and he sat down and he grilled the head of the Banking Association and treated him, as they say, like he was a freshman right out of college. And anyway, what happened, the upshot was that they threw out the banksters, and they created the Bank of Canada, which then created money and gave it to the government, who loaned it into circulation or spent it into circulation on infrastructure projects. And this pulled Canada out of the Depression so quickly. Canada was one of the first countries, I do believe, to come out of the Depression because of this. And all these incredible projects that we had in this country, and still have, still standing, many of them, were all done during in 1936, from the inception of Bank of Canada to 1972. So this would be the St. Lawrence Seaway, CN Rail, that has spur lines to just about every major town in Canada. All of our road infrastructure, schools, hospitals, hydro plants, armed forces. We had, I believe, the third biggest standing forces when we went into the Second World War. So prosperous was Canada. Employment was at its lowest level, and the wealth of general Canadians just continued to increase from there on in. So what happened in 1970 to 1972, the government of the day, which actually, as it happens, turns out to be Pierre Trudeau, invited the banksters back into Canada to run the Bank of Canada. And at that time we only had a debt of $18 billion, which we owed to ourselves. And that was cancelled out, and we took on a new debt of $37 billion. And from there on in, from 1970 to present day, you can see immediately the banksters came in and took over our Bank of Canada. Inflation just kicked right in and took off. So the truth of the matter is that we have not missed a payment in all that time, from 1972 until now. We haven't paid 1 cent of the principal of that $37 billion. And we now owe $668 billion in interest on a $37 billion loan. Now tell me, how is that possible? How is that earthly possible to be in that kind of situation? We pay, and this is in the Blue Book, and you'll see by the in this little documentary that is linked below. Please, I ask you to go check this out, because it will clarify so much for you in a pictorial fashion, so much better than I'm doing here in this short video. Maybe this is a video to bring your attention to this documentary that's linked below, The Crime of Canada, the Canadian Banking System. And so you can see it's in the Conservatives Blue Book, the Liberal Red Book, and I think even the simplest of mind can see that at the rate we're going, we will never, ever, ever pay off that debt. We pay $40 billion a year in interest on a $37 billion loan. And you know, the finance minister holds 100% of the shares of the Bank of Canada. And so Joe Oliver could tomorrow go into the Bank of Canada and say, gentlemen, clear out your desks, we're taking it back over. And we could basically kick these people out with this criminal debt. You know, if you create a debt that's unpayable, that is listed a criminal debt. It is unpayable. You can see that this debt is unpayable. And again, as I say, watch this little documentary, and it is going to go into far more detail than I am here, but it will give you a very good picture, because until we understand what has happened here, we will never resolve our money problems. We will always have union and company conflict. The unions of the government workers, we will always be in conflict with them. And where this drives everybody is to Greece. And of course this is so very cleverly set up in the divide and rule way of doing business, because you see, as you can see, civil servants are paid well enough to keep up with inflation. Wages today, had wages kept up with inflation, minimum wage today would be $32 an hour. That is what you need to have a somewhat meaningful life in this country, and to be able to afford to save for your pension, $32 an hour. And of course you can see, by and large, the general public do not make that kind of money. So the civil servants are kept abreast of inflation one way or another, and companies that have, or employees that have strong unions backing them, you know, you'll notice that most of the wages, the car companies, well, they've renegotiated them now, but they were up around about $30 an hour, which is perfectly keeping pace with inflation. So what happens is, when this starts to take a real serious hold, and you can see now we're kicking into austerity. The new premier in Quebec, Monsieur Coulard, is going into austerity measures. You can see that Kathleen Wynne is starting to go into the austerity mode by taxing and tolling everything except your income tax. And they're going to continue to do this. So what happens is, internally, the civil servants are the ones who pick up on this debacle taking place in front of our very eyes, and they see the outcome where benefits are going to be cut, wages are going to be cut. So they then, in desperation, turn to the public and say, join us, come with us and join us, and we will fight to stop this theft that is taking place. And of course what happens? The rest of the public who have not kept up with inflation look at the civil servants and say, well, you left us out of the loop for 30 years and you now want us to support you. And so at the very time when we need to set aside our differences and come together to speak up about this travesty that's taking place, we start fighting amongst ourselves. And that is what I'm frightened is going to happen again, is we're going to start fighting amongst ourselves instead of joining a common front and demanding that we go back to a no-interest system for the Government of Canada and the Bank of Canada. That money, we can create our own money. And Gerald Grattan McGeer asked the key question, and you'll see they've got the transcript from the case, the commission inquiry. And the key question he asks is, why on earth would we pay a bank in interest to do that which we can do for ourselves? And the head of the Banking Association says, if the government chooses to do so, it can legislate that. It is within the powers and purview of the federal government to do that. Canada could be great again. We could have total 100% employment in this country. The only people who wouldn't be working would be those too old to work, those too young to work, and those through physical impairment or mental impairment are not capable of working, and they would not be left behind either. They would be, a place will be found for them in Canada. As Bill Abrahams points out in the videos, this could be a wonderful country, and we could break out. We could break out of this rut that the whole world has gotten into by stepping away, by stepping back, by having the courage to tell these banksters that our debt to them is paid off in full and we are not going to pay any more. We can do this in Canada just like Iceland did. And I think we need to have a discussion about that amongst the whole public, because we are the ones who are going to suffer. We're the ones who are going to suffer from the consequences of this banking travesty that's taking place in our country. Anyway, I hope that you find this informative, and that if you enjoyed my little rant. I think it comes at a perfect time because Christmas is upon us, and of course what happens at Christmas is lots and lots of people go into debt. Lots and lots of spending is taking place. And so I think this is a very appropriate time to talk about debt, indebtedness, and what we, the public, could do about this to resolve the problem. Anyway, I thank you very kindly for spending some time with me, and I'll be making some more videos soon about other issues that are going on around us and in the world today. And with that, I bid you a fond farewell and a great weekend. This is Steve Clark from KLAM, signing off.